August 1944. A village square near Chartres, France. Music fills the night air for the first time in 4 long years. An old accordion squeaks to life, its bellows pumping out a celebratory melody. Hidden wine bottles emerge from dusty cellars. Young and old villagers spin around the cobblestones, laughing under the summer stars. Suddenly, a military convoy grinds to a halt at the edge of the square. Dust settles on heavy green fenders. General George S. Patton sits in the lead command car, his face illuminated by the dim dashboard lights as his drivers prepare to refuel. A 75-year-old woman in a faded floral dress breaks from the crowd. She approaches the general, speaking softly through the roaring engine noise. Her simple request catches the entire staff by surprise, demanding a choice from the hard-nosed commander. Patton will offer an unforgettable answer that defines his hidden grace. This is the story of a hard general who halted his armored column to grant an old woman the first dance of her liberated life. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show humanity in the darkest places. Madame Jeanne Moreau was 75 years old, a lifelong resident of the quiet countryside outside Chartres, and a woman who carried the heavy weight of survival. She spent her days tending a small garden and keeping her eyes aimed at the floor, a habit learned through 48 months of avoiding the glances of conquering soldiers. Her husband had died in the chaotic summer of 1940, leaving her alone in a house that grew colder with each passing season. She kept her memories locked away in a cedar chest, alongside a single flowered dress that she refused to wear while foreign boots marched down her street. When the American tanks finally rattled into the square, she opened that chest, smoothed the fabric, and walked out into the sunlight. Captain Robert Vance was a 29-year-old officer from Richmond, Virginia, serving with the 3rd Army Headquarters staff. He had fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, lost his best friend to an artillery barrage outside Saint-Lô, and watched the liberation of a dozen broken towns. His job was to manage the chaotic movement of supply trucks, keeping the fuel flowing so the armor could keep running. He was tired, covered in grease, and accustomed to dealing with desperate mayors, broken bridges, and shouting soldiers. He stood by the staff car, checking his watch against the refueling schedule, completely unprepared for the small, elegant figure, threading her way through the celebrating crowd. By late August 1944, the German defense in western France was completely shattering. The Allied breakout from Normandy had turned into a rapid race eastward, with armored divisions covering dozens of miles in a single day. 3rd Army supply lines were stretched to the absolute limit, snapping under the sheer speed of the advance. Tank commanders fought for every drop of gasoline, while logistics officers worked through the night to route fuel trucks across bombed bridges and muddy fields. Entire regiments lived on cold rations, moving constantly, chasing a retreating enemy that left behind burning vehicles and abandoned gear. In the wake of this chaos, towns that had been occupied for 4 years woke up to find their captors gone and American stars painted on the passing armor. This rapid pace meant that conventional military protocol often fell by the wayside during the frantic push. Division commanders routinely ignored minor rules, and local units made their own arrangements to keep moving toward the German border. Many staff officers looked past the sudden crowds, the civilian roadblocks, and the impromptu celebrations that threatened to slow down the columns. The war was moving too fast for anyone to stop, for formalities or standard pleasantries. Military police focused entirely on directing traffic, pushing civilians out of the path of heavy trailers, and keeping the thoroughfares clear for the next wave of half-tracks. Yet the sudden arrival of Allied forces created an emotional vacuum in every village they touched. 4 years of silence, curfew, and fear ended in a matter of minutes, leaving populations eager to reclaim the lives they had lost. Most generals kept their eyes fixed on the map, refusing to let the local joy disrupt the calculated timing of the invasion. They drove through the cheering lines without tapping the brakes, focused on the tactical objectives miles ahead. But as the convoy paused in the dust of the village square, the momentum of the entire regional advance slowed down for a single person. Captain Vance watched the fuel hoses connect to the heavy tanks when he noticed the elderly woman step into the light. She stopped near the front fender of the command car, her hands smoothed over the clean fabric of her floral dress. The young captain walked over, keeping his posture firm but polite. He asked how he could assist her, hoping to guide her back toward the sidewalk where the crowd was dancing. The woman looked up at him with clear eyes and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. She said she had not danced since her husband passed away in the dark days of 1940. She pointed to the general sitting in the vehicle and asked if the commander would honor her with a dance. Captain Vance looked back at the command car, then down at the fragile woman. He told her that the general was directing a massive army and had no time for festivities during a critical refueling stop. He explained that the column would be leaving the square in less than 10 minutes. The woman did not step back. She stated that the town had waited 4 years for this single night of celebration and freedom. She remarked that a true liberator should understand that a dance is the first real sign that the fear has ended. Captain Vance felt the weight of the moment, realizing this request went far beyond standard military regulations or basic traffic control. He walked to the side of the command car, saluted carefully, and informed the general that a local civilian was requesting a moment of his time for an unusual matter. He translated her words exactly as she had spoken them, waiting to see how the commander would respond to such a break in routine. The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the center of the square. 4 stars on his helmet caught the flicker of local torches, and the ivory revolvers on his belt rested against his trousers as he surveyed the sudden silence. The general looked down from the high seat of the command car at the old woman standing in the dust. Patton studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the cobblestones. He asked the young captain if this lady was the one who had made the request. Captain Vance nodded once. Patton looked at the elderly woman in the flowered dress. He asked her if she truly intended to dance in the middle of an active military refueling zone. She nodded. He asked her if she knew that his tanks were moving to chase an army, not to host a ball. She smiled faintly and said she knew. He asked her if she believed a general belonged on a makeshift ballroom floor. She replied that a true commander belongs wherever his people are finally free. You see this village as a mere coordinate on a map, a brief delay on the road to Germany. You see these supply trucks and these fuel hoses as the only things that matter tonight. You see the war as a series of movements and grand strategies. But you forget why we drive these tanks through the mud and the blood. We do not fight simply to conquer territory or to burn enemy equipment. We fight so that people can open their locked doors and walk into the light without fear. This woman has carried the silence of a dead husband and a conquered nation for 4 long years. She did not save her best dress to hide it in a cedar chest forever. She saved it for the day the music came back to France. A gentleman does not ignore a lady when she asks for a dance on the night of her liberation. You have a choice: comply with the spirit of this victory, or remain frozen in the routine of the march. Decide now. Patton stepped down from the vehicle, adjusted his heavy helmet, and straightened the jacket of his uniform. The 4-star general walked directly toward the center of the muddy square. He stopped right in front of Madame Jeanne Moreau, giving her a formal, old-fashioned bow under the dim glow of the village torches. He extended his right hand, and the old woman immediately took it, her frail fingers resting lightly against his leather glove. The local accordion player squeezed his instrument, pumping out a slow, smooth waltz that echoed off the stone buildings. Patton led the dance with practiced rhythmic steps, moving with an unexpected elegance that stunned the watching crowd. The 75-year-old woman followed his lead perfectly, moving across the cobblestones as if she were completely weightless, her flowered dress spinning in the night air. Nearby American soldiers leaned against their dusty tanks, watching the scene unfold in total silence. Local villagers stood along the sidewalks, tears welling in their eyes as they watched the first public dance their town had seen since the surrender. For 3 full minutes, the roar of the armored convoy gave way to the soft rhythm of a 3-step waltz. When the final note faded, Patton stopped, bowed deeply once more, and kissed the back of her hand, leaving the village to erupt into a deafening roar of cheers and applause. Madame Jeanne Moreau remained in her quiet village for the rest of her days, watching the seasons return to the French countryside without the shadow of foreign boots. She kept the flowered dress wrapped in clean paper at the bottom of her cedar chest, showing it only to her grandchildren when they asked about the night the tanks arrived. She passed away peacefully in the winter of 1964, buried next to her husband in the churchyard behind the town square. The memory of her 3 minutes on the cobblestones remained a local legend, told every summer when the village marked the anniversary of their liberation. Captain Robert Vance returned to Richmond, Virginia, after his discharge from the 3rd Army Headquarters staff in late 1945. He resumed his pre-war job at a local shipping firm, raising a family and rarely speaking about the heavy logistics of the European campaign. He kept a single-clipped copy of the Signal Corps photograph in his desk drawer, a blurry image of his commander mid-waltz with an elderly French grandmother. Vance lived a quiet, industrious life, passing away in the spring of 1989 at the age of 74, General George S. Patton never recorded the incident in his official diary, nor did he mention the brief delay to the press corps chasing his column. He kept his focus entirely on the eastern horizon, pushing his armor toward the German border before the autumn rains could slow his fuel trucks. When his aide asked him about the waltz later that evening, the commander simply remarked that a gentleman always answers when a lady asks. Some military historians have argued that General Patton's spontaneous pause in the village square was a dangerous distraction from a critical strategic breakthrough. They claim that halting an armored division for a civilian celebration risked the momentum of the entire regional advance toward the German border. Others have argued the exact opposite, maintaining that such public acts of genuine compassion were vital for cementing the loyalty of liberated territories. They believe that demonstrating immediate, tangible respect for local populations did more to secure the rear areas than an extra mile of marching. What is certain is that the single photograph captured by that Signal Corps photographer remains one of the most durable and famous symbols of the Allied liberation of Western Europe. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have ordered the column to keep driving to stay on schedule, or would you have stopped to dance with her? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about humanity in the darkest places, make sure to subscribe.